Welcome, I'm Sharon Anderson, President of Leiomyosarcoma Support and Direct Research Foundation, or LMSDR for short. And today I'm really excited. We have two guest speakers who are going to tell us how the FDA approves new drugs for leiomyosarcoma. First, Dr. Vaibhav Kumar. He's a medical oncologist and he's a clinical reviewer of oncology studies for the FDA. And we also have Dr. Leslie Doros. She's a team leader for the FDA's Sarcoma team, and she's a liaison for their Sarcoma scientific team as well. So thank you very much. Let's welcome the doctors and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Firstly, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Like as Sharon mentioned, I am a clinical reviewer in Division of Oncology 3 at FDA, and don't worry, over the course of my presentation, I hope to fully clarify what that actually means and what I actually do here. And I would like to start by thanking Sharon and Susie for the kind invitation to present today on what I hope to be an informative and useful talk going over FDA's perspective on oncology product development in rare diseases. I have tried my very best to keep regulatory jargon and abbreviations to an absolute minimum, and will be happy to clarify things further at the end. Oh, there you go. So when making the slides, I did seek advice from Sharon and Susie on what really matters most to the members of the foundation. Firstly, I will provide an overview of FDA Oncology, who we are, what we can and cannot do. I will go over our oncology product development, specifically identifying issues related to rare diseases. And lastly, I'll focus on programs at Oncology Center of Excellence, or OCE for short, which allows for patient advocacy and public engagement. And we'll have plenty of time at the end to discuss questions and go from there. So FDA is ultimately responsible for protecting the US public health. That includes assurance of safety and efficacy and security of not just drugs and biologic products, but devices, food, cosmetics, veterinary medicines, and radiation products. In fact, almost 25 cents of each dollar spent in the US is on products regulated by the FDA. And the word efficacy is very important, and there is no one-size-fits-all definition. For an oncologist, an example is measurement of tumor shrinkage on scans. For other specialists, efficacy is measured differently. Note that new sort of drugs must be proven safe and effective to FDA standards before companies can market them. FDA's authority is granted by Congress, and so some misconceptions are that FDA has a role in regulating drug pricing or how drugs are used once approved. This is not accurate. FDA does not regulate the cost of products and does not regulate practice of medicine. Drugs can be prescribed as the physician sees fit based on what is best for that individual patient. Another misconception is that FDA is solely involved in regulatory review of products. However, we're also very involved in science, collaboration, and external engagement. This is a particular aspect of my job that I very much do enjoy, as it allows me to attend forums such as this. So the Oncology Center of Excellence was established in January 2017 and was authorized by the 21st Century Cures Act. The goal is really an ongoing modernization and improvement in the way we review oncology products. There is a little bit of alphabet soup here, but in essence, the Oncology Center of Excellence, or OCE, helps unite scientific expertise across FDA's different product centers. The aim is to conduct expedited review of drugs, i.e. CDR, biologics, things like vaccines, stem cell therapy, CBER, and devices, CDRH. And then to get more specific about the team I work in, which is Division of Oncology 3, similar to what you would see in an academic center, the push at FDA is to have specialized teams focusing on specific disease areas. So my role is to work with many colleagues from multiple disciplines, focusing on drug development in sarcoma, gastrointestinal malignancies, diseases like colon cancer, cutaneous malignancies from melanoma to rare skin cancers. All of the oncology divisions aim to be consistent when making the determination of whether a drug product is safe and effective. The risk-benefit assessment is always a balancing act between being too cautious and requiring increasing amounts of data to approve a product, or the other end of a spectrum, which is requiring less data. The process is, however, very important, and we aim to be efficient, transparent, and aim to exercise flexibility where appropriate. This is also the case for rare diseases. So FDA recognizes that there are clear differences in developing new therapies for common versus rare diseases. The Orphan Drug Act was passed in 1983, and it classified a rare disease as one affecting fewer than 200,000 people in the United States per year. The Orphan Drug Act provides incentives for companies to develop products intended for the treatment for patients with rare diseases. This includes tax credits, waiver of fees under the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, which is PDUFA for short, and providing a 7-year market exclusivity, which means the same drug or generic can't be approved for the same indication for 7 years. The Act does not change the regulatory standards that must be adhered to when reviewing a product, irrespective of whether the condition is rare or common. Overall, approximately a third of drugs designated as orphan status comes from oncology. So the basis of a drug approval is guided by the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, the approval of any drug for either a rare or a common condition, there must be demonstration of both substantial evidence of efficacy and sufficient information to conclude that the drug is safe from adequately designed trial or trials. The information generated is important, so in the eventual label that is going to be used by physician has enough information so that the product is used safely and appropriately. An approval is for the product to be used in a specific indication, for example, metastatic breast cancer, and not for a blanket approval for the drug to be used in multiple tumor types. Also in FDA regulations are the provisions to allow for flexibility in applying regulatory standards because of the many types and intended uses of drugs. In early drug development, the goals are to assess whether a particular drug is safe and if it is demonstrating preliminary activity against a tumor. As the drug development progresses, the goals change to assessment of meaningful benefit. Now, in modern drug development, the lines between early and late drug development have blurred considerably as innovative strategies are being increasingly used. However, if a drug is demonstrating evidence of a favorable risk-benefit profile, that study is submitted to FDA for review and possible approval. Now, the timeline of a drug development program is very much dependent on the drug and the indication that it is being developed for. There are key meetings with the FDA to discuss the development plan that indicates the type of studies that will be conducted to support the eventual approval of the drug. Now, FDA's involvement typically spans the entire course of drug development, including after the approval, as FDA continues to monitor the safety of the drug. Now, when reviewing data submitted for an application, it is important to look at the whole picture. This starts with assessing the drug development in the clinical context, the rarity of the disease, and the available therapies. When looking at how effective a drug product is, it is not just the statistical significance, but also how clinically meaningful and the magnitude of the benefit that was seen. The efficacy is then balanced with the safety when we make our risk-benefit assessment. The type of approval given to a drug, accelerated or traditional, depends on the trial design and is an important concept that I will go over in more detail. We have many programs at OCE that is looking more closely at doses, demographics of patients, including clinical trials, And I'll go over these specific programs right at the end. Now, I'm going to get more specific on soft tissue sarcomas. Now, as you're aware, soft tissue sarcomas approximately affects 13,000 people in America every year, and there are approximately 150 subtypes, with leiomyosarcoma being one of the more common. Unfortunately, nearly 5,000 patients each year will die from soft tissue sarcomas, and we know that the response to chemotherapy, specific targeted drugs, and radiation varies significantly depending on the subtype. Now, since the first drug approval for soft tissue sarcoma in 1974, which was doxorubicin, we have been seeing increasing effort in drug development in this space, and now more focused development on specific subtypes, which is encouraging. In the last 10 years, there have been 5 additional drugs that have been approved in specific subtypes, and I'll go over some regulatory perspectives on 2 of those just for the audience here today. So we can identify several challenges in developing drugs for sarcoma. As I've previously stated, less than 1% of all cancers in the US are sarcomas. That itself is a significant hurdle to overcome when developing drugs. Prior to the last 10 years, most drug companies had combined all subtypes of soft tissue sarcomas into one study. And as we've learned over the years, is that one size does not fit all. Clinical trials are now starting to enroll more subtype specific drug development or molecularly defined patient populations. And there is definitely a movement away from that all-comer approach. In oncology in general, we've also seen increasing use of patient-reported outcomes to characterize the benefit of new drugs. This can be useful to include in trials specifically for sarcoma drugs, given the different rates of growth of these tumors. Sometimes some tumors grow slowly over months or years and often become fibrotic. These tumors may not become smaller in size, as we see with many other tumor types. Stable disease, however, is not an endpoint that we've used to characterize benefit. So for these very reasons, incorporating the patient-reported outcome data, which is data on how a patient feels, functions, and overall the patient voice in clinical sarcoma trial design, is very important concept to consider. So this table outlines 2 drugs that I was talking about that have been approved for different sarcoma indications. What I want to highlight is the label traditional versus accelerated and the term endpoint in the final column. If we focus on trabectedin, which several individuals on the call today may be aware of, it was approved in 2015. And this was based on a randomized controlled study that compared trabectedin to another drug called dacarbazine. As this was a head-to-head comparison, we're able to assess the differences in a very important clinical trial endpoint, which was progression-free survival, or PFS for short. Now, I can fully appreciate that cancer clinical trials are full of abbreviations, and I've definitely used a lot on this slide. So I've included a link at the bottom of an FDA initiative to help provide jargon-free glossary, which may be helpful or useful, and I'll obviously send these slides to Susie and Sharon at the end. So when I go back to PFS, PFS is generally defined as the length of time from starting the treatment that a patient is living with the disease, but the disease does not get worse to a point where we need to change therapy. Given that trabectedin demonstrated an improvement in progression-free survival that was both statistically and clinically significant, and in the context of a favorable risk-benefit profile, trabectedin was given a traditional approval. Now, tazemetostat in 2020 was given an accelerated approval. And I'll highlight how this study endpoint differed from the trabectedin study. You can see again in the endpoint column, there is the term objective response rate, ORR for short. The study evaluating tazemetostat was a single arm study. That is to say, they did not have a comparator arm, right? There was no control. In these instances where we can't compare the differences in PFS, we can sort of and have used ORR for approval. Now, ORR effectively tells us the percentage of patients in which, and in this case, the percentage of patients with advanced epithelial sarcoma who have had more than a pre-specified decrease in the size of their tumor. Now, clearly, ORR is an earlier endpoint, and compared to something like PFS, which also means there's more uncertainty on whether this will translate into a more robust measure of benefit. So I will spend just a little bit more time in going over these two regulatory pathways of US approvals. The accelerated approval pathway or the traditional approval pathway, which path one really takes is down to the primary endpoint in the context of the disease. And that's why I really wanted to focus on the key differences in the endpoint between the trabectedin, which was given the traditional approval, and the tazemetostat given the accelerated approval. So going a little bit more deeply into accelerated approval, the FDA instituted its accelerated approval program to allow earlier approval of drugs that treat serious conditions and that fill an unmet medical need based on a surrogate endpoint. Now, the term surrogate endpoint is an important one, and this is effectively a marker, most commonly response rate in oncology, that we have enough confidence in to believe that it is reasonably likely to predict clinical benefit. The product is required to demonstrate meaningful therapeutic benefit over what is already available. Now, as we're using a surrogate endpoint, a marker, even after an accelerated approval, companies are still required to conduct studies that show the drug actually provides clinical benefit. When this occurs, then the FDA converts this to traditional approval for the drug. If the confirmatory trial does not show that the drug provides clinical benefit, FDA has regulatory procedures in place that could lead to removing the drug from the market. All right. So Sharon and Susie wanted me to go over methods in which patient advocacy and engagement occur at OCE and go over sort of other interesting programs that we have to improve our ability to learn and collaborate. So with that, I will start with project community. This is the avenue that led to this particular webinar. And the objective of sort of OCE's project community include developing a synergistic collaboration among FDA oncology reviewers and the community. And I do have to thank Dr. Fashionage, Ria Blakey, Janae Stowe, who worked tirelessly in ensuring that we continue to improve patient input regarding the design of clinical trials and improve the quality of our regulatory decision-making. Now, we want genuinely have the patient voice central to the process of increasing the number of effective cancer diagnostics and products available for both rare and common conditions. Public forum that Ria Blakey helps lead and moderate is called Conversations on Cancer. And here we have patient advocates in combination with academia examining sort of cancer-related issues. Now, the video I have here is from one of my favorite discussions, and that was going over the issue of finding the right dose in clinical trials and why more is not necessarily better. Another important public health initiative here at FDA is Project Equity, which is also led by Dr. Fashionage. Now, this initiative aims to ensure that the data submitted to FDA for approval of oncology medical product adequately reflects the demographics for the patients it's intended to treat. Now, the goals are to work across all OCE programs and develop and promote policies to ensure adequate enrollment of historically underrepresented and vulnerable subgroups in oncology clinical trials. And this was something that I thought Susie was very particularly interested in, and that was Project Orbis. And Project Orbis provides a framework for collaboration among international regulators that was initiated by FDA OCE in May 2019, and then the first action taken in September 2019 with a combination of Australian TGA and Health Canada. Now, I've listed some of the other collaborators in this particularly growing field. Now, this program, the Real World Evidence Program at FDA, is near to dear to me. I'm one of the newest additions to this team, and the aim is really to improve scientific collaboration and policy development to find a fit-for-purpose generation of real-world evidence that we can use for patient-centered regulatory decision-making. Now, real-world evidence is becoming more important for rare diseases like sarcoma in potentially overcoming some of the challenges we encounter given the small number of patients in trials. Last two, we have Project Patient Voice, and this is an online platform for patients and caregivers, along with healthcare providers, to look at patient-reported symptom data collected from cancer clinical trials. It allows the healthcare provider and patients to discuss symptoms that patients have experienced related to a cancer treatment. And then the last program that I'll go over is the FDA Patient Representative Program. And this is an agency program that offers patients and caregivers the opportunity to provide critical advice to the agency as it relates to medical products. Now, patients and advocates are appointed as a special governmental employee, and FDA patient representatives engage with the scientific members and other experts as they participate on FDA advisory committees. So although with the pandemic, there is definitely more opportunity for tele-engagement such as this, we are actually physically located at the White Oak campus in Silver Spring, Maryland. We do go to the office pretty regularly and ensure that we continue to work collaboratively to meet our objectives. And so with that, I will conclude my presentation. And here's some more links. And again, I can forward this to Sharon and Susie so they can provide others with some of the elements that I've discussed today, and more than happy to take questions.
Oh, great. That was very comprehensive. Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure.
I'm also interested in, Leslie, do you want to explain what you do being part of the sarcoma team and Liaison?
Sure. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been at the FDA about 6 years now. I'm a pediatric oncologist by training, and I've always loved rare tumors. I have been evaluating them and doing research on them since I was a fellow in my training. I joined the sarcoma team when I came on board with the FDA in 2015. And in the last year, we've had a little bit of reorganization within our division, and I am now the team leader for the sarcoma team. We also do have expertise in some other tumors as well, but my main focus is sarcoma. I am also the sarcoma scientific liaison for the FDA. So for all of the different centers, I represent and provide expertise in sarcoma. So if you have any specific questions about sarcoma and sarcoma drug development, I'm happy to take those. I think, one of the big points for this type of program and really being able to reach out to the different patient advocacy groups, I think we really want to push the message that your voice is extremely important. It's important in drug development, really in all aspects of drug development. It's really critical to hear your thoughts, the experiences that you've had potentially as either a patient or a caregiver. That really means a lot to us. And we do take that, the patient voice very, very seriously in patient development.
Well, that's wonderful to know. And we have a way to get hold of you if we need to.
Oh, absolutely. I think both Sharon and Susie, they have my email.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, and please feel free to share that with anybody. I'm happy to answer any questions now or, that you have in the future.
Okay, so use the chat box if you're shy and don't want to ask a question. It's also okay to unmute yourself. Just don't give any identifying information or any of your medical background. And Susie's got a question.
Can you all address the off-label use of drugs in sarcoma.
But can you say that again, Susan?
The off-label use, for example, I got remission from gemcitabine and docetaxel, but neither have been approved for leiomyosarcoma.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer that, Leslie, if you want.
Yeah, so, we definitely know and physicians can use drugs that are approved for other indications off-label. One of the other big projects that we have here is called Project Facilitate, which I think is important for patients to know that this is available. So if there is a drug that's not approved, or that the specific patient is unable to enroll on a clinical trial for, they don't meet the specific eligibility criteria, but they still want to get this drug, then the patient, along with their physician, can go through the process and submit a small protocol to Project Facilitate, and we review that and can get those turned around within 24 hours so the patient can have access to that drug.
That's wonderful. I had the same question as Susie in terms of how the FDA views a lot of the patients now have genomic testing, and the idea is to match their tumor mutation to existing drugs on the market. So again, that's using drugs off-label. Does the FDA frown on that or encourage it, or?
I think with that, it's never sort of ever going to be a one blanket answer to that. I think we're always trying to center on good science and make sure that we follow due process appropriately. So I wouldn't say there's one right answer. But like I say, it all comes down to, in order to facilitate ongoing modernization, we have that program, Project Facilitate. It is designed for this reason, because we're fully sort of understanding that it's not, that oncology drug development and management is becoming more precise, and the previous histology-based treatment that we had is also changing. So yeah, we're fully aware of it, but we also have to do it within sort of confines of what of the FDA sort of regulations.
And Sharon, just to expand on that a little, I think, you all are probably aware, when clinical trials started out in sarcoma, they just lumped you all together. And over the years, we've certainly come to realize that that's not the approach that needs to be taken. And you can look at, the approval with olaratumab and doxorubicin. That drug, ended up not panning out, but they were, they included all different types of soft tissue sarcoma. So was there a potential that one of the different 150 types of sarcoma that was actually, where we were seeing the treatment effect happen? And along with that, not only looking at the specific sarcoma subtypes, but we're starting to learn, like you said, Sharon, what are the specific alterations that we see in the DNA of patients? So are there specific drugs that can be used if a patient has a specific mutation? And yes, we are starting to see, we call that some of the drugs that we have, it's called a tissue agnostic drug. So those approvals are for that specific mutation. So if your cancer type had that specific mutation, we do have several drugs that are approved right now that target specific mutations.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of us end up not getting drugs identified for our mutations yet, but I'm aware there are some. So it's a new and budding field, actually. So we have a couple questions in the chat. I don't know if you doctors can see them, but Susan asks, what's next? Is there a new type of drug that may be approved for LMS someday?
We hope so, right? So we can't specifically speak about drugs that are in development right now. I mean, certainly there's, you can look and there's public forums, like clinical trials, which is a really great resource that you can look at different drugs that are being evaluated for leiomyosarcoma. And we certainly hope that there are going to be some more promising drugs in that field. But, if there are any that are out there right now, unfortunately, we can't discuss the specifics of it, but you are seeing more and more physicians and researchers that are looking at these specific subtypes. You see, leiomyosarcoma only has, one drug currently approved. And then we have doxorubicin and pazopanib that are approved, sort of broadly for soft tissue sarcoma. And in recent years, just gastrointestinal stromal tumor, which is one of the most common type of sarcoma, has 5 drugs approved for it. Epithelioid sarcoma, as Dr. Kumar pointed out, has a drug. And then inflammatory myofibroblastic tumor just got approved. Crizotinib got approved for that indication. And we've also had tenosynovial giant cell tumor, which has a recent approval. So that's really the way things are going. And not only in the specific subtype of sarcoma, but again, looking at those molecular and those genomic alterations to see if there's something there that can be targeted and use a targeted therapy.
Right. And I think Susie and I, we're long-term survivors 20 years out. And I think we can both testify that we've seen a lot more drugs on the market for LMS since we started, right, Susie?
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
I am also a breast cancer survivor myself, 16 years. And you're right. I mean, there's just an explosion of activity and research and new drugs, which is just great for all patients.
Yes, it's wonderful. And it seems like with LMS, there's just so many different mutations.
Mm-hmm.
So what drug works for, 10%, a different drug will work for 18% and a different drug and it's just finding the right drug for the right tumor mutations for the right.
And I think with all the different subtypes of sarcoma that you have, we're also looking at those genomic and mutational, those alterations, not only in, one sarcoma, but on all the different subtypes. So if a researcher sees that there's a specific mutation across many different types of sarcoma, then, that's something else that you could look at where you would have a bigger patient population to pull from.
Great. Okay. Bob Roth, can you write a little bit more about your question? I'm not sure. TP53, maybe he wants to know what's the status of finding a drug that targets TP53, which would be the Holy Grail, I think.
I mean, you're right.
That's exactly what I want to know. Yep. Yep.
And you're very right in asking that pertinent research-based questions. As going to the fundamentals of cancer biology, we're looking at TP53, and as Sharon just really alluded to, is sort of the Holy Grail is to try and find the switches that switch cancers genes on and off, and try and find ways to target these things. And it's unfortunately we don't have any specifics that I can really hope, but we all hope that one day we can target some of these key genomic factors that lead to 20, 30 years ago we didn't have anything in the KRAS space, and now we're seeing that come across. Mm-hmm. So just, we're all sort of bated breath as technology improves, our diagnostics improve, and then eventually our targeting improves, right? So it's all done in sort of in a stepwise manner. But 20, 30, 40 years ago would be unheard of to even think or to even contemplate it. But so the acceleration is happening. But obviously, when you're talking about something as pivotal as TP53, we're all bated breath here.
Yes. Joanne Anderson, do you have your hand raised up, or you had your hand raised up?
Yes, I do.
Go for it.
Okay, how do let me just, okay. So I'm waiting for a trial to be approved, and it's in phase 3, targeted at ULMS. And I was at the oncologist the other day, and he said, it's in the government's hand. And I said, well, how long is it going to take? It's a PARP inhibitor. And, he said it, he didn't know. So is there any way that you can give me an idea of once something's in a phase 3, how long it would take and what they look at to determine if it can be used?
Good question.
Right. That's a very pertinent question, and and I'm not trying to give sort of a political answer here because I know it's very pertinent to you, Joanne, and I want to be as specific as I possibly can. But obviously, to give you the really right answer, you need to know all the details, you need to know all the specifics, and I can't even then, I'm not permitted to share some of that information because you want to be fair to all the drug companies that are being sort of evaluated at the same time, and everyone is in a slightly different sphere, and they trust us at the FDA with their privileged information when we're not, that's one of the reasons why we're very duty bound by our confidentiality agreements and by all of the ways we approach things. So I would love to be able to give you specifics, and I'm not keeping anything from you. It's just in terms of specifics I can't go into. And similarly on the timeline, Leslie, we can give some generalities if that's okay. So once a drug is submitted to, say, Division of Oncology 3, we have a regulatory project manager that starts the clock, right? And the clock is called and we have a PDUFA goal date. So the goal date where we have to review all of the data and make our decision for the company by the date that is specified on day 1. And that is pretty sort of hard and fast. And what we in our Oncology Center of Excellence, the goal is to try and beat the clock, right? So we're not waiting till the last minute. The goal is to try and beat the clock, specifically because of such individuals such as yourself, Ms. Anderson, because I know we know it's important. How long the clock is dependent on the type of application that's been submitted.
And just to expand on that a little bit. So, you were asking, once a drug is in phase 3 development, how long is that process? So there's a lot of things that go into that. How big is the trial? How fast can they enroll patients? But typically, once a trial is open in the phase 3 part, it generally is going to take years for them to be able to gather all that data and get enough information to be able to give it to us to start the review process for potential approval. Now, again, if there is, kind of as we talked about Project Facilitate, so you can speak with your doctor about potentially getting access to that drug. Say you don't, if you aren't able to be part of that trial or you don't meet the criteria for that trial, there's a potential through Project Facilitate to get that drug off label. A lot of times drug companies, when they do come in for approval, they'll also open an expanded access program. So that's kind of a bridge to allow patients from the time the drug is submitted for approval until it gets approved, that patients can get access to that drug.
Yeah, it was submitted, I believe, in April. And my doctor said it should be approved this fall as a phase 3. It was a phase 1A and B, and then it went to 2. But you're saying it could take years? I don't think I'll be alive in years. You know, you sit there as a patient and, you know, what road do you go down and how do you evaluate what you do? And, you know, some of the things I read are above my intellectual level in knowing, like I'm trying to understand the PARP inhibitors, and I understand it, but I don't understand it like the doctors do. And, you know, you, as a patient, you sit there and, you know, you don't know what to do. You know, currently on gemcitabine and doxycycline, which didn't know it wasn't approved, but, you know, so I have to, the project patient voice, because I'm talking to my oncologist tomorrow. And she's been through a lot of trials in MSK. And I didn't even know that was available because I wasn't approved for a lot of trials because I was on too many chemos. Like you could only be on 3. So, which is informative. It's just, you know, it's not like you're buying a dryer on sale. It's like, it's your life. And it's hard sometimes. And, you know, you don't know when you talk to doctors, you know, what information they're given and how, you know, are the people that are on the project, are they given a date? So when they tell you like around a date that it would be approved or not approved?
Yeah, so to go, and I don't want you to go away with the impression, Ms. Anderson, that it's years for the approval date. So like I say, without knowing specifics, and I don't want to go into specifics about the thing, once, you know, data is submitted, there is a PDUFA clock for us to make our decision, and that's not years, but that's all in keeping with the totality of the data that's been submitted, and how long that clock is down to sort of the type of application that we have in-house. So, and I was very interested to watch the webinar on your website, Sharon, you know, from the gentleman that just preceded us from Colombia, I think he was.
Yeah.
I thought it's pertinent. One of the things that
that's the trial that
so that's one. I'm again, without going into specifics. So one of the things he said about inclusion criteria on trials and reducing some of the burden that and that is a sort of a oncology-wide, including FDA initiative, which is to try and make trials inclusive for everyone. And that because, you know, it's not good enough to just have a well-run trial internally and then it doesn't represent the American patient population, right? So that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons why I highlighted some of those other OCE programs, because it's a stepwise process, and we at the FDA are very much in keeping with wanting trials to look like the American patient population and not just select groups. So you know, like I said, I wish I could go into more specifics, Ms. Anderson, but unfortunately, I'm not allowed to.
No, it's great that, you know, supposedly I'm approved for the trial.
Great.
There's other things I'm looking at, but it's nice to be able to hear what the process is. You know, just as a patient, you want it to go faster rather than slower.
Yeah,
yes,
I can
absolutely.
tell you, Joanne, that the years is how long it takes from a drug to get to clinical trial stage through the 3 stages, if not 4, to be approved. So that's the long haul process of drug development. So Susie has her hand up.
Let's cross our fingers. Thank you.
I just want to clarify, Joanne, for you that so the trial, olaparib and temozolomide, I hope I'm pronouncing them correctly, are both already FDA approved, just not for LMS. So it's like so the issue then becomes, whether insurance or Medicare would cover it. So, for example, for me, it can get really expensive if your insurance won't cover it. But so the drugs themselves are already approved for other indications. So they're available, if you can
afford it.
Doctor to prescribe them,
Yeah,
But
you
it
get
was-
hit one way or another.
right? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we have other questions. Let's see, Kim wants to know any current drugs in the trial stage that target RB1. Also, David Bowles asked if we could share the screen with the FDA resources. We will have that available for you, David. So rest assured, have some patience. We'll get that up for you.
And David just sent me a message. Can one get access to drug therapy between phase 2 and phase 3? So again, trying to read between the lines, and these phaseologies of drug development is really being blurred now. So we do try and think of it as where things are. Are you looking at how safe the drug is, or are you now starting to look at see how effective the drug is? And usually that's kind of like the latest, as we move through the phraseology. But ultimately, if I'm answering your question, David, it's more a case of has the drug been shown for it to be available widely to the public outside of a clinical trial? It really needs to be at the FDA under our purview and seen to see, okay, is it safe and effective and approved? That's obviously the way to do it. Or you have the clinical trial method, or as Dr. Leslie mentioned, you have Project Facilitate. So we want to try and cover all of our sort of potential options. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Thank you. Kim's question, are there any trials that target RB1 right now? I'm just curious, do you know about the trials for LMS right now, or it actually is once it's done and the data comes to you for review, that's when you become aware of the trials?
So we, when you get the slides, we actually meet researchers, so people like at Columbia. We meet people right from when they're thinking about starting a trial to the time when they're submitting the drug for review and getting it approved. So we have inputs all the way through.
All the way through.
Specifically for drugs being intended to be used in the United States. Obviously, globally, that's not the case. So we are aware that the tricky parts, again, to talk to Kim's question is really discussing specific trials in a sort of in a public forum, because why would you discuss one with another? So that's one of the reasons why we tend to be general in the way we discuss things as opposed to specific.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and if somebody, an investigator or a drug company is doing a protocol or, evaluating a specific drug for LMS, we would evaluate all of those from the beginning, very first infancy till it comes in for approval. So we would know about all the different types of drugs that are being evaluated.
Okay, good to know. We're coming almost to the end of the hour. I have a question. What can patients and caregivers do to help advocate for more drugs to be approved? Of course, we want them to be worthy drugs and safe drugs and effective drugs, but what role can we play in terms of this drug development process?
I think that's obviously a very, very pertinent question. I think fundamental to drug approvals is good drug development and clinical trial participation. So I've already watched, the benefits of a foundation such as this right here tonight, which is Susie talking to Miss Anderson and giving her sort of insights as to what's going on. So I think having these type of approaches and having good informed ways of getting onto clinical trials, well-targeted clinical trials, knowing some of the ups and downs of getting onto it, the timeline and all of those things, and having a good sort of collaborative supported network ultimately will improve our clinical trial infrastructure, which is what is needed to keep that momentum going. That's sort of a broad brush answer to your question.
Yeah.
Sharon.
Well, I'm always advocating for people to look at clinical trials first when they're in the doctor's office and they're just starting systemic treatment or thinking about it, to look at the clinical trials first, because there could be doxorubicin, which is fully approved, but it's mixed and combined with a new drug that's in clinical trial. And you may get the benefit of the new drug earlier on in the process. So I say, look at that. And sometimes, yeah.
So again, just to go back to the gentleman who presented, for life of me, I can't remember his surname, but he mentioned, again, the inclusion criteria and making sure that you use the drug development program at a particular time of for example, after doxorubicin. We actually have another initiative that we're starting here at FDA, which is going to be looking at trying to bring things up into the first line setting when appropriate. So trying to encourage that development of safe and effective drugs earlier in treatment lines so patients can get maximal benefits. So again, these are all downstream processes of patient advocacy, and then that's sort of leading to initiatives down here at the FDA.
Great. I'm glad to hear we have a voice and a response to that, what we have to say. So Leslie, you want to add anything?
Yeah, and some of the programs that Bob spoke about in the latter part of his talk, we're going to send it to Sharon and Susie, and they can distribute it out to people. But there are a couple of programs, Project Patient Voice, and then becoming a special government employee where you're actually involved in the Oncology Drug Advisory Committee, where we, put out sort of to the public when we want to discuss drug that's coming in for approval. And so that's one way to be able to, be on a committee for that. We also, with a lot of the patient-reported outcomes and clinical outcome assessment. So, that's really where we get into listening to the patient voice, because it's a lot of times, there's been a change in our approach to, is it just enough to have anti-tumor activity, or do other things matter to the patient? And yes, other things matter to the patient. Like, I want to feel better. I want, how does this, my tumor might not be, gone, but if I have a tumor on my arm, I can now move my arm, where before I couldn't move my arm. So that should be those types of things that the patient can tell us are very important. And very important aspects of looking at a drug getting approved.
Cool. You're on mute.
Of course. I think we're starting to run out of time. We have one more question. Why are holistic approaches not favored by the FDA, or are they?
I guess holistic approaches is a broad is a broad terminology, and I think again I wouldn't say where the perception of it not being favored or favored comes from. I think it's all down to the science, and that's one of the things about here us at the FDA. We're not sort of, our preconceived biases are really irrelevant, because we're very much down into the science of how things are developed. Is it being done properly? Are we asking the right questions? Whether it's sort of a holistic approach, if I'm using that phrase correctly, or a traditional, early phase drug development to sort of the late phase. Ultimately, it's all about making sure that the science is keeping the public safe and we're using effective processes. So, yeah.
Thank you. I just want to thank you both, Dr. Doros and Kumar, for such a wonderful and thorough look at the FDA and what you do and how you incorporate patient input. I can't wait to give out all the resources to everybody, and thank you once again. It's been very informative.
Thank you. Really appreciate the invitation and anything I can do to help.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.